Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hunt Club podcast, the product briefing show. Today we are going to talk about another Azure security nightmare, which is hybrid and multi-cloud defense. So my name is Tiffany Nip, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Vectra AI, and today I'm joined by Aakash, who is our Senior Product Manager at Vectra AI. So Aakash, let's get right into it. My first question to you is, so what are some of the hybrid and multi-cloud services in Azure that attackers can abuse?
Yep. I think what we're seeing today is a trend of a lot of customers deploying in the cloud. And so what they're doing is they're tying in their traditional data center environments to the cloud to orchestrate things like workloads. And so there's this deep communication. There are
Mm,
several different kinds of services that allow you to talk across that boundary between the cloud and on-prem environments, Azure App Services, Azure Policies. But a very interesting one is Azure Automation Accounts.
mhm,
These are essentially a way for you to run scripts or orchestrate workloads, both or run scripts in the cloud and in on-premise environments. So with an Azure Automation account, I'm able to orchestrate tasks both in the cloud, but interestingly also in on-premise environments. And we see
mm.
these being used more prevalently as customers start to go from more IaaS style deployments, lift and shift, to more PaaS style deployments in Azure.
Yeah. So do most customers will have automation accounts in their environment then in this case?
Yeah, I mean, as you start to become more mature in the cloud, that's what
Yeah.
we see. Like it's sort of the future of how folks deploy cloud native in Azure. You need to
Yeah.
use services such as these to connect the two, which is quite
Got it.
important, which also introduces with the goods, the bads, which we can talk about here in a second.
Yeah. Let's My second question to you then is then how do attackers abuse these automation accounts given they're all over in organizations' environment these days?
Yeah, fundamentally, if I have access to run a PowerShell script anywhere in your footprint, and I have the right permissions to do it, I have sort of found myself in this golden pocket that I can go start to play around with. And that's what attackers usually do.
Mm,
So with the good comes the bad, right? Automation accounts follow this sort of life cycle where you would first have to create an automation account runbook, which is where I sort of store the code that I'd want
mm,
to run. Once you create this runbook, you then have to publish it or stage it. And once you stage it, you can then execute it. Usually these happen in an order, but what we often see is, uh, given its, the complexities of the Azure environment is sort of how I put it, you
yeah.
can edit a staged runbook. A runbook that's already staged can be edited, and you don't even have to stage. We often see ways for you to execute or test your runbook immediately after you've created that. So there's this way to finagle your way around these different steps. And what we see is from an attacker's perspective, this
Mm,
actually opens up quite a few opportunities. The first is the way you'd expect it to, right? Like I have the right permissions, I go create a runbook, and
mhm,
then I stage it, but I don't actually run it. I'm very sinister about it. And I wait for somebody else to come and execute the runbooks. What this does is this sort of like leaves me bare in terms of the responsibilities. And I am now
mm,
sitting in the back just waiting for like a scheduled task or an admin to come run a bunch of runbooks.
mhm,
The other way we see attackers being a little bit more direct is you create or edit a runbook and you execute it immediately. Like it's your way of testing the code, and you can do
mm.
that immediately without actually staging it. And so I think this is sort of a layered mechanism of looking at how automation accounts are abused in Azure.
Yeah, got it. So they can basically do it and then wait 2 months before it is actually executed. So which makes the detection very hard in normal cases, right?
Yeah, because oftentimes like creation of a runbook in itself is not malicious, right?
Yeah,
Like we see it happening in a normal environment, in a
yeah,
normal cloud native environment several times a day. And so the question is, how do you know what the right thresholds are and what the right behaviors are that you want to have it on?
got it, got it. In that case, then what do defenders need to do to prevent this from happening and stop attackers from abusing automation accounts?
Yeah. Uh, how we've done it here is looking at the life cycle as a whole,
Right.
right? We have three different models that we've thought about when looking at the sequence of events that happen around automation accounts. The first is
Mm,
around staging of an automation account, making sure that automation accounts, that runbooks that are being staged are actually meant to be staged. They're coming from the right identities and they're meant
mm,
to do the tasks that they're actually being permitted to do.
mm.
We then
Right.
see suspicious testing. This is where after creation, someone's trying to immediately execute a runbook, and that's test the runbook or execute it, and that's sort of what we're able to see. And then
Mm,
suspicious execution as well is something that we track. So all across the skill chain, making sure we have the right models to look for the right kinds of behaviors is actually quite critical.
mm.
And that's how we see it over here.
Right. And what is the value of having three different detections on this then, rather than just one?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, we did allude to the fact that um, this is a life cycle, and any one step in a silo may not necessarily be a bad thing. The question is,
Yeah.
if I start doing multiple of these, uh, how do I increase the clarity around the signal? And the way you do that, and not alert on like several different one-offs, is showing that kill chain. And so for customers, what we see is if you can show that audit trail of suspicious staging and then execution, it's far more valuable than just saying a random runbook was staged. That's not as meaningful signal. And so
Mm,
it's catching the entire life cycle.
right. Got it. Cool. Then let's move on. Yeah, and talk about some real world examples that we're seeing as well.
Yep, absolutely. So none of this is rooted in like theoretical analysis, right? This is all stuff that we've seen in the real world. Peach Sandstorm was a very interesting use case a couple of years back where this Iran-backed APT group came in and then an environment sort of moved through the kill chain, moved laterally within Azure East-West movement. And we did see that after privilege escalation, they were able to test runbooks and stage them for deployment. We then actually
Mm,
saw automation execution um, by these threat actors. And so what this enables an attacker to do is move from that cloud boundary into connected environments. Oftentimes, what we see in like the midnight blizzards of the world is they started in the on-prem side and then moved into the cloud. What we're trying to highlight here is that the reverse is also possible, right? Like you may start in one and then
yeah.
pivot to the other. And so
Yeah.
we've seen connecting this to the real world. It's quite important for our research.
Yeah. Right. So let's move on to three takeaways that we want the audience to take away with. So from our conversations, it sounds like the first one is that automation accounts are present in a lot of organizations' environment, especially when they migrate to the cloud and as they become more mature in their cloud journey. The second thing I took away is that the attackers can abuse them and they can be very stealthy and evade detections and hide and not execute the run book immediately. So it's very difficult for defenders to detect these behaviors. And that's why the third takeaway is that we need AI detections, such as what we offer here in Vectra, to detect these attacker behaviors, looking at the context behind, the identity behind doing it, in order to stop these kind of attacker behaviors. What do you think,
Yep.
Akash?
I would agree, right? And I would sort of like add to your last takeaway of
Yeah,
across the kill chain, right? Like not the
yeah,
one offs, because then we'd be inundating you with like hundreds of alerts a day around this. But the idea is to catch sessions of behaviors that are suspicious. And looking at the
yes.
life cycle allows us to do that. So perfect.
Totally. Thanks a lot for another great episode with Azure Security Insights, Akash. With that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. If you haven't checked out the other Azure security related podcasts, do check them out. And if you like our content, do give us a like, comment, let us know what you think, and subscribe to our Hun Club podcast channel. With that, thank you so much for joining me again, Akash, and for you tuning in with us. And I hope to see you in the next episode.
Thanks for having me
Thank
on.
you. Bye.